Hey there, my name's Brashler, and in this video, I want to teach you how to get a foot switch working on your Behringer WING to control a bunch of different parameters. My favorite is the Talkback function. Now, if you're brand new to my channel, I'm all about helping you feel more confident with your production gear, no matter where you're starting from. So let's go ahead and dive in. Now, I went to Sweetwater and just purchased this simple foot switch, and this is a Ampero Switch Plus by Hotone. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. But then the other thing that I ended up getting was these little Barefoot button covers that made it so that when my foot is on this unit, that I can feel which button I'm actually going to be pressing, because this is going to be sitting on the floor for my foot. And what's great about this for you monitor engineers is then you can just use your foot to control different parameters on your console. And this is perfect for a talkback button, which is what I'm going to show you today. Now, another thing that you could do is you could function it for changing your scenes or pulling up a different page on your screen. There's a bunch of different options, and basically any function that you can control with a user button, you can also assign to a foot switch. So with this foot switch, what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect a TRS cable to the output of this foot switch, and then that is going to connect into the GPIO interface on your Behringer WING. So GPIO stands for General Purpose In and Out. And it allows us to either use the Behringer WING to control a function of a switch for a different piece of gear, external of the Behringer WING. But it also allows us to use a foot switch for controlling two different buttons. So each TRS input has two GPIOs on it. So the Behringer WING Compact and the Behringer WING Rack both have a single GPIO TRS input. The Behringer WING Full Size has two, meaning that the WING Compact and the WING Rack both have two GPIOs, and the WING Full Size has four. In this case, today, I'm just going to be using a single TRS with two buttons to be able to control stuff on my Behringer WING Compact. So what we do is we connect our TRS cable off of the output of this little foot switch, and then we plug that directly into our GPIO input on the back of our Behringer WING. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to press setup and then press setup again. And then this comes to our custom controls page. Now, this is where we would put any of our user buttons that we want to program, but there is a little section right here that says GPIO. And so I'm going to go ahead and press that. And what that does is it pulls up a GPIO 1 and a GPIO 2. Now, there's a couple of different functions within this. So if we see our settings, we can see that there is a TGLNO and a TGLNC, and then we have an IM and O, and then an in and C, and then we also have out and O, out and C. Now, NO stands for normally open. What that means is that it is expecting this switch to be normally open, which means that it is not connecting the path electrically for a switch to be normally open. Now, normally closed means that if that button is normally closed, making that connection all the time, then that is a different function. Now, there's a slight difference between these two when it comes to our toggle, but also a slight function difference when it comes to our in. Now, I'm not going to be talking about the output, but basically an out of a normally open means that the contact switch of the GPIO output version is going to be open, and an NC means that it's going to be closed, meaning that it's going to be making that connection unless you press a button to activate that GPIO output, in which case it would open. But in our case, we are going to just be talking about the inputs, which comes to toggle and input. And the difference between toggle and input is toggle is a push to make that action and a push to make that action again, whereas in is just momentary, meaning that if we push the button, it's going to activate that function, and then once we release it, it's going to deactivate that function. So let's first talk about in normally open. So I'm going to select input normally open, which means that GPIO 1 is now an input and it is expecting this foot switch to be normally open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through my functions, and we can see that there are a ton of functions here that we can select from as far as our GPIO. And again, any user button that we can program on the Behringer WING, we can program on the GPIO input. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Other, and then I'm going to go to my Talkback B and have that selected here. Now, my Talkback B is usually what I have to go through to the PA. And so if I'm mixing front of house, Talkback A just goes to the band, Talkback B goes to the band plus the PA. That way I can make an announcement over the PA if I need to, voice of God, that sort of thing. But in this case, you guys are hearing the output of this board. So if I press my Talkback B and I talk into this, you'll hear the output of this microphone. Now, with my Talkback B here, we have selected my channel A, or my channel 1, to be the foot switch for this GPIO. Now, this is normally open, which means that if I press this button, then this check 1, 2 will go through to the PA, and then once I release this button, it will not go to the PA. Now, that is what we normally think of when we're thinking of a foot switch. We want to press it to be able to talk, and then we want to release it to not talk. Now, if I set this to NNC, which is normally closed, and I'm going to press this once here, now what's happening, and we can see this kind of right here. If I set this right here, we can watch our talk light. What's happening is now this is like a cough switch, where if I don't want my talkback mic to be going through, I can press the button and then it won't go through to the PA. And then once I'm done coughing, I can press that, I can release this button, and then my talkback mic is working again. Now, then the other function of this is the toggle. So let's go take a look at the toggle. I'm going to go to toggle normally open. Now, what this will do is anytime I press this button all the way down, it's going to toggle my talkback. So check 1, 2, check 1, 2. We can see that every time I press this button, it's going to initiate my talkback. And then once I press it again, it's going to deactivate my talkback. Now, the function of normally open with this switch being a normally open switch means that if I press this switch down, the action of the toggle is going to happen when I push my foot all the way down. And then when I release it, it is just released. It's only making that function actually occur at the down portion of this switch. Now, if I switch this to normally closed, now this button is a normally open button. What's going to happen is when I push it down, it's not going to actually function with anything until I release this button. Now, at this point, this talkback mic is working. Now, if I press it down again, it's going to wait until I release that button to actually function that talkback here. So I'll have this right here next to my talkback so you can see this a little bit. So here it is. I'm going to push it down, and then I will release, and then at that point, that talkback is working, and then I'm going to push down, and then I'm going to release, and when we release, that talkback is then turning off. And that's going to be the difference between that normally open and that normally closed for that toggle. Is if you have a normally open switch, meaning that it makes contact when you press it, then if you have that set to the same function, normally open, then it's going to make that actual contact occur when you press it down all the way. But if you change this to be normally closed on the toggle, it's going to wait for the up portion of that switch mechanism. And so that's the main difference between toggle and input. Is toggle is going to just be a once press and then press it again to turn it back to whatever. And then input is going to just be momentary. Now, if I was wanting to set this up as a foot switch for a producer or a show caller that's at front of house that's doing voice of God announcements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my input of this microphone to be on input 1. And we will go set this up as a VOG mic. So here we have our input 1, and I'm just going to change the name here to VOG. And then we're going to go add a bunch of gain here. Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have this microphone working here. And so if I was wanting to give this microphone to my voice of God person. So my show caller is going to be making announcements during this corporate show, for instance. What I can do is I can give him a foot switch. And what we can have that as is we can either have it as a press on to unmute this, which is what I'm going to first set it up as. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our setup for our GPIO by pressing setup twice and then going to our GPIO function. And I'm going to set this to normally closed on input. And we're going to go up to channel mute, and I'm going to select my channel 1. Now at this point, what we have done is I've made it so that if this person presses this down, it's going to unmute this channel. And then when he releases this, it will then go back to muting that channel. Now, I had to do this as input normally closed because it's actually the opposite action of the function that I'm programming. If I programmed this as a normally open, then anytime that he pressed this, it would actually mute the channel. So now it's turning into a cough button, basically a cough switch, which is a very common thing for newscasters, for instance. They have the ability of pressing that button to mute their microphone if they need to cough or clear their throat, something like that. And then when they release that, then it's unmuted. But we want to actually make that the opposite action, which is why I'm doing input normally closed, which means that if this switch is up, it is muting that channel. When he presses that, it will then allow this microphone to go through to the PA, and then when he releases it again, it mutes that channel. So that's another function that we can do with our GPIO. Now, there are so many different ways that you can use this GPIO input to control a bunch of different things. You can do mute groups, you can do inserts on and off, you can even control your show if you wanted to. So basically, any function that is on this page, we can program to a GPIO. So how I would normally have this is I would be setting this to normally open, and I would set this to Talkback A, which is going to be under Other, and Talkback A, and then GPIO 2 is also going to be normally open, and it is going to be on Other, and then Talkback B. So here is my Talkback A, and here is my Talkback B. Now, if we go into View, and I make my Talkback A latching, what will happen is this will still be momentary, because we have programmed this to not be a toggle. But if I go and press this, then it's going to be latching here, which is important to note. Now, if we have this on auto and I press it once, it will latch. But if I press and hold it, it will just be momentary. However, this is always going to be momentary, as we can see. I can press this button as many times as I want to, and it is not going to latch. It's only if I go and press that button once, then it will latch. Press it again, it will turn off, or if I press and hold it, it will go ahead and be momentary until I release it, that sort of thing. So the switch mode of your Talkback is independent of how you have this set with the GPIO. Now, if I wanted this to be a toggle, what I would need to do is I would need to go back to setup again to my input 1, and I would change this to toggle normally open, and then toggle normally open for my Talkback B. And at this point, now this is a toggle, and that is a toggle. Now, I hope this video was helpful for you today. This is actually a pretty cool function of the Behringer WING that Behringer integrated into this mixer. It's just one other way that we can improve our speed and workflow while we're mixing and make things a little bit easier on ourselves as we're doing that show. Now, if you do happen to have any questions, or there's a video that you're hoping that I would make on the Wing, or really any production equipment that's out there, please post that in the comment section down below, as I'm always reading through those comments to find videos that are going to be helpful for you. If you haven't already, make sure to check out my website at drewbrashler.com, where I have a whole bunch of articles, tips, and tricks, as well as some downloads for all the different Behringer mixers out there. So check that out at drewbrashler.com. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day.